I'm going to keep this informal, so if anybody wants to interrupt, and then I'm going to talk for a little while and then have time for questions, because there may be some things that I can help fill in that you might want to know about. But let me go back to where I grew up and my background. Just to start with, I grew up in Akron, Ohio, one of the dreariest places in the country. When I grew up, it was the rubber capital of the world, and the Cuyahoga River caught on fire. And so I applied to only schools in Colorado. And I got into Colorado College, and I got into University of Denver and several other schools, and almost went to Loretto Heights College for Women because they were just starting to admit men. And I thought I would get lots of dates. But lo and behold, I ended up at Colorado College. And when I was in school, I actually worked in a bookstore called the Granite Harp Bookstore. And it was downstairs below a kind of a health food hippie restaurant called the Sugared Mule Restaurant at the time. And it's gone now. The building was moved, and they haven't been around for a long time. But the Granite Harp Bookstore went out of business, and I was able to buy their books. In fact, they couldn't pay me, so they were paying me in books. And I had a bunch of friends from college who had books, and lo and behold, in 1975, when I was still a senior at Colorado College, I opened up Poor Richard's Used Paperbacks. And it was a small little store. I had ammunition cases from Surplus City that were 29 cents each and had handles on them, and you take the shells out and you could hammer them together and put them on cinder blocks, and that was my bookstore. It was in an old house at 519 North Tejon Street. And when I would go to class, I would leave a box on the counter that was a cash box with the sales tax chart right there. And I would tell people the price of the book was there to add it up. There was a little calculator, and people would always leave the right amount of change, and they thanked me for letting them buy the book. And as far as I know, nobody ever stole. And so that was an era that's probably long gone. But my first real business, though, was opening up Poor Richard's Feed and Read restaurant. And if you go into the restaurant today, you'll see an old sign that's hand-carved that a friend of mine did for free. She wouldn't take any money for it. And it says Poor Richard's Feed and Read. And we put the books in the restaurant. And then I actually went back to Ohio, where my father had some snack bars and businesses that he had, and got all of his equipment. And believe it or not, I opened that restaurant for $8,000 in 1977. Now it's hard to buy a refrigerator for $8,000. But we had books on the walls. Before then, there weren't many bookstore-restaurant combinations. In fact, I didn't know of any. And we every now and then a book would fall off the shelf and land in somebody's soup and splash them in the face. And so eventually we moved the bookstore over, and we started showing movies in the back of the restaurant. And it was called Poor Richard's Cinema. And back then there was a movie theater called The Flick, which showed all the art films, and they went out of business. So if you look at the marquee that I have right now where my Toystore is, that's the old Flick marquee. If you go to Kimball's movie theater and you see the big projector in the lobby, that's my old projector. But in the back of the restaurant, there's 2 windows back there, and we started out showing 16 millimeter films, and I was the projectionist, which was a terrible mix because I'm not good with equipment, and I was always sitting back there waiting for the projector to break, and occasionally it would, and I'd have to go out and tell people the ending of the movie, and I had seen it so much I could describe it. She's carrying the body, and this person died, but it was definitely homespun and fun. Eventually we moved the bookstore across the street. We put the bookshelves on wheels. We had a bigger movie theater. We line up chairs at night, and then finally became a kind of a bookstore movie theater combination. Another one that you never hear about much. And so you could read the books in the movie chairs during the day, and you could at night watch movies. But finally, I sold it to my friend Kim, who opened up Kimball's Twin Peaks, and I had it from 1982 to 92. And then we had that space there that was open, and I started to notice that a lot of our customers were having kids that had been coming since the 70s. And there was no specialty toy store downtown, and so the first time I really ever ventured into major debt. I borrowed $150,000. I got a small business loan and opened up Little Richard's Toy Store. And lo and behold, and if there's a theme to my story that you'll hear here is being at the right place at the right time. Lo and behold, right when I opened the store, Beanie Babies were starting to be a craze. And we were able to get them, Ty only sold them to small stores. They didn't sell them to Walmart or to, the Toys R Us. And so we were able to get people lined up around the sidewalk at night for Beanie Babies. We only sold them for what we would normally charge for toys. They call it keystoning, where you double the price. And if it's $2, you sell it for $4. Whereas everybody else would, sell them for $30 or $50 to collectors. And so I was able to pay off my small business loan quickly for the toy store. And I was really proud of that. And then in 2005, we opened Rico's Café and Wine Bar. And that was with my wife, Patricia, who is now my full partner in the business. And Patricia has a great eye for design, for how things look and feel. She's transformed the bookstore. It's about half a gift and card store and half a bookstore now. And the way Rico's looks and feels is really her doing. I'm more of the cook. I wear the apron and back behind the scenes, and she's really somebody who really understands how things should look and feel. And so we talk about being blessed, about having great businesses, because we not only make a good living, we're not rich, but once we pay off our building, which we finally bought after renting for 31 years, we'll be able to retire. We can pay a living wage to our employees. Our minimum wage is $12 an hour. We have a lot of people working for us at $15 and $20, and we offer health insurance after 6 months. And we have employees that love us, have been there a long time, that we love them. We love our customers. And then we sell books, chocolate, pizza, wine. We have great cards and gifts and toys. What could be more fun than the businesses that we have and how we are able to make it all work together? And I think the key in some ways for us is to mix it up. If we had just a separate little bookstore or a separate little toy store, it wouldn't be the same as combining them together. So we actually have a liquor license for the whole complex. I think we're the only toy store in the country with a liquor license. We joke about the special hot toddler drinks that we have. But people can wander around throughout the complex, and it just becomes a nice place for people that want to have something for them and also maybe something for somebody else in their family or with their friends that's different. So the kids will be in the back in the play area playing and having pepperoni pizza, and the parents will be there with a glass of wine and a cheese plate. One of them might sneak over to the bookstore and find some books, and it works out great, where we are able to have a nice cross-section of people. And so the way that I've always thought about business is to be there at the right time. And there's lots of times in my life where I feel like I've just been lucky. When we first opened Poor Richard's Restaurant, there was no espresso in Colorado Springs. There was no quiche, there was no bagels, there was no frozen yogurt, no gazpacho, things that you could probably get 2/3 of those things at 7-Eleven now. But back then, people would come in and go, if I eat enough of them bagels, Richard, I'll turn into an Italian myself. And they had no idea, because it just wasn't. It was new back then, and we were able to be there at the right time. Same thing with New York style pizza. I had a 3-year stint in New York City where I had sold the restaurant from 1986 to 92. I still had my movie theater and the bookstore, and they were able to be run remotely. I was ordering movies, but I had another mini career as a film critic. And most people don't know this. I was actually the first film critic in Colorado Springs for the old Colorado Springs Sun newspaper. I worked for free, and eventually I think they paid me like $25 a week, and I learned how to write movie reviews. I never had experienced that before, but had a great editor who really sat me down and said, this is what you need to know and how to write reviews. And so I was watching all these movies and showing the movies at my movie theater. And then I had an idea, and this is right when movies were coming out in the video stores, that the art films that people grew up with and watched in college, the Fellini movies and the Bergmans and the Hitchcocks and the old Bogart movies, all those were, you couldn't see them unless you went to an old theater. They called them revival theaters. I showed some at my theater, but they were just starting to come out in the video store. So I was able to work with a friend of mine that had been an agent at Bantam Publishing, and she presented me, she was my agent in New York City, and actually got me a book contract to write a book it was called Off Hollywood Movies, like off Broadway, but off Hollywood. And it was a guide to art films that were just coming out in video. So I moved to New York City because most of them weren't out in video yet, and they were only in 16 millimeter. And so that's where the film distributors were, and I'd grab them and ride on the subway with these films, and then show them on my bedroom wall. And that's where I met my wife, Patricia. She became my movie partner. We both realized we loved movies, and we were just movie buddies for many, many months. But we always agreed, and we always seemed to, have a passion for the same films. And I ended up staying in New York City for 3 years. I worked in a bookstore there called Applause Cinema Books, and then I worked on another book project, which was really fun, but I never did, which was a guide to offbeat New York. It was going to be called Only in New York. And so I spent about a year exploring all the unusual parts and corners of New York City, and the city is just full of characters. There's a indoor drive-in movie theater. You sit in these old 57 Chevys. There's kosher wineries that go under streets, in the old Jewish district. There's a Puerto Rican drag queen club where everybody dresses up like Carmen Miranda, and you walk in, you think like you're on a set in the 50s, and you go through the list of the characters in New York. There's an eyeball store that all they have are eyeballs. And there's a big sign in the window that says "Eyes for every occasion." And I don't know if these places are still there or not, but I had a lot of fun with all that. But never wrote the book. Patricia decided that she wanted to try Colorado, moved back. And at the time, I also had a consulting business in New York City where we helped people find hard-to-find movies and set up film festivals with a friend of mine that was a film distributor. So we would work with libraries, and we would work with universities, and we would we brought in an African American film festival in Jamaica, Queens, New York, and we had all these different kinds of festivals. So not only through the book I wrote and watching all these independent films, but through this community cinema consultants that I wrote, that I was a part of, I ended up knowing how to do that. Came back to Colorado Springs and had another idea, and that was, why don't we start an environmental film festival here? And this was in 1990, actually 1989, and it turned out that the person that was helping me with it, was out here taking care of her aunt, had worked with Hollywood celebrities and had been a Los Angeles Times reporter. So she knew them all. She had friends, telephone numbers, and lo and behold, we had all these celebrities come. We called it the U.S. Environmental Film Festival, and in 1990, it was a national Earth Day event. We had MTV, we had all these stations here, and in Colorado Springs. We sold 10,000 tickets. Cesar Chavez came and spoke. We had all these, Helen Caldicott, all these famous environmentalists, and very, very successful. Took us by surprise and took me by surprise. And that was the time when I first really got confidence that I could speak in public and get up in front of a lot of people and sometimes with celebrities and be able to do something because I knew my subject. And what was compelling about the Environmental Film Festival was that this was a time when everybody had video cameras. They didn't have cell phones, but they called them beta cams and video cameras, and they would go around and they would take pictures of footage of environmental problems that all of a sudden people could really visualize because they could see it. So we had filmmakers who were really risking their lives. There was one guy who was hiding out on Panamanian tuna boats. taking pictures of the dolphins that were caught in these, they called them the nets of steel, the death traps of steel. And he was found out, he was beaten up, and he stored his film in private parts of his body and escaped, and then showed this footage that was just horrifying. Hundreds of dolphins just dying in these nets, and he showed it at our film festival, and because of that, he was able to show it in front of Congress. And because he did that, they actually created the dolphin-safe tuna that you see on cans today. That Congress was so taken by that footage, and there was many other ones too that were just very compelling. Until you visualized environmental problems, you didn't see it. And this was 1990, right after 3 Mile Island, right after Chernobyl. Valdez had just happened. The summer of '88 was the hottest on record in New York City. There was needles washing up on the beach in New Jersey. No birds left in New England because of acid rain. I mean, it was a dark time. And by the way, a lot of those issues have gotten better. So not only did I get the confidence to be able to raise money and to get up and speak in front of people, but I also had all these environmental images in my brain. In fact, I watched over 2,000 environmental films. I mean, there was just nothing that I couldn't visualize. And because of it, it became a passion for me. And so my foray into local politics was really about protecting our beautiful landscape, our mountain backdrops. And we had all these areas, and Terry Putman is here, and we worked together on lots of them together. By the way, he's somebody you should thank for Red Rock Canyon and for Cheyenne Mountain State Park. They wouldn't exist without Terry Putman. Yeah. And but Terry and I think we talked to each other more than we talked to our wives back then, because we were always plotting. But we passed the TOPS initiative in 1997 after losing in '95. 1/10 of a cent goes to trails, open space, and parks, raises about $6 million a year. We finally had a pot of money to buy land at fair market value. And it wasn't fair to go to a developer or a private landowner and say, give us this beautiful land. We had to buy it as if we were going to buy it for development, but then not develop it. And so we were able to save Stratton Open Space and Red Rock Canyon and Cheyenne Mountain State Park and Blodgett Peak and Union Meadows, and you go through the whole list of this, not just the mountain backdrop, but places out east. Corral Bluffs is a new one. TOPS is still going on. And it was my kind of foray into politics. I was one of the co-directors of the TOPS campaign, had a ponytail. Every time the Independent did a best of issue, I would get best leftist radical, best old hippie, and best tree hugger. And the old hippie, I didn't mind being best hippie, but old hippie, I didn't like it. But so finally I talked John Weiss, who was a friend of mine, who actually started the Independent in my office upstairs for 6 months. He came and wanted to do this newspaper, and I introduced him to places and people. And I was the first editorial page editor and writer for the Independent. But I finally said, John, get rid of those categories because I think I want to run for office. And then in 1999, I ran for council and I won. And then I ran again in 2003. I came in last. There was 4 people that could get elected, and there was a group of 12, and I came in 4th. I came in 2nd in 2003, and then they elected me vice mayor. And they appointed me, believe it or not, I had the seniority on council because all these other people had run for mayor and lost, or were term limited and couldn't run again. And so I was the vice mayor for 2 years. And then they were afraid I was going to run for mayor, so they booted me out. Not because I supposedly I was doing a good job, but they didn't want me to run for mayor. And my reputation is to be as a liberal in Colorado Springs. And I've never been crazy about labels. In fact, I'm registered independent, non-affiliated. I voted a lot in Republican primaries. Many of the colleagues that I've worked with in council and through other projects through the years are Republicans, conservative. We all get along. In fact, we agree, half the time. Environmentally, I'm definitely liberal. I'm passionate about it. I'm passionate about our air, about our water, about our outdoor life. I just feel like we live in this blessed place, this little corner of the world, where we cause about 8% of our own air pollution. We drink primary source water. We have access to 1.1 million acres of natural backdrop. And it's just a blessing to live here. And I think it's the reason that we will survive and thrive in the future. And so I guess you could call me a liberal. And then I'm also liberal on social issues. And this is the one that was uncomfortable, and another way I got involved in politics. But it just so happened that when I grew up, my best friend, my cousin Larry, who spent more time at our house than his own because his mother was in a mental hospital. We had our bar mitzvahs together, we went to summer camp together, he vacationed with us, he probably ate dinner at our house 3 or 4 times a week, and he was gay. And every night when he'd have a sleepover, he would cry. And I didn't know why, and he never told me, and he hid it his whole life and he committed suicide. Larry killed himself when he was 34. And it just so happened that my best friend, besides Larry, was this kid named Tim Remington who wasn't gay, but hadn't matured. He had a late bloom or whatever. He turned into a tall, strong, handsome, but kids made fun of him. They called him Homer. And he was ostracized in junior high school, and he was made fun of all the time. And the guy, it wasn't gay. I mean, if he was, it shouldn't have mattered. But people. And then my best friend Stephen in college, my roommate, happened to be gay. And Stephen, hid it, tried to be with women, and it wasn't successful. Finally came out, and his father disowned him. His father shot at him in the house, missed him. His grandmother wouldn't speak his name anymore. He was completely isolated and separated from his family. I got a call in the middle of the night, and he was outside the hide-and-seek nightclub where he had gotten beat up by people with baseball bats. Just, people wanted to go and beat up on the gay people. Well, Stephen happened to be gay during a bad time in the history of that when people were getting AIDS. Stephen finally found a partner for life, this guy David. They were together for 5 years, and David came down with AIDS. Just one day Stephen called and said he's got this growth in the back of his ear, and we're worried. And lo and behold, David had AIDS. Stephen, was with him the whole time, died in Stephen's arms, and then Stephen got AIDS. And I was lucky to be with him when he died. And that was in 1990. It was in October 1990. Well, think about Colorado Springs in 1990. Focus on the family had just moved here. Amendment 2 was getting going. Will Perkins and Coloradans for Family Values, all that was percolating. And I was very, passionate about people who happen to be gay. Just were born that way. And that's the way I feel. I know everybody has their opinions, and I'm not, I'm not here to say I'm right and you're not. But having said that, it was a time where I got involved in the culture wars in Colorado Springs. And I felt that people that happened to be gay and that lived in Colorado Springs especially needed that support. So I got involved in that issue as well. And over the years, I fought for domestic partner benefits for city employees, and I was on the board of the Gill Foundation. I don't know if you know Tim Gill, but the Gay and Lesbian Fund for Colorado. And I was the token straight person on the board. There's 4 of us and Tim. And so I've gotten involved in an issue, and I think it's finally settling in this country in a way that makes me feel good, because I just, always hated the notion of people not being treated well because of who they were. And a lot of it's my background. I grew up Jewish in Akron, Ohio. All my grandparents came from Russia. They were all immigrants, and they all left during the pogroms, which was kind of like being in the South in the 40s, where the White Russians, the Cossacks, would come into a village, and they would sometimes burn it, or they would kill a family member. Jews weren't allowed to own property. They didn't have birth certificates, and the Tsar actually paid for passage in between 1910 and 1915 for Jews to come anywhere they wanted to go. And so all four of my grandparents came. My grandmother, an interesting story, was that she came by herself because her mother died in childbirth with her younger sister Anna. And her father got gangrene. He got an infection in his arm and was too proud to get it cut off, and so she was alone. She immigrated by herself at 15. She had an uncle from Akron, Ohio that sent for her. You weren't allowed to come until you were 16, and she lied about her age, and she ended up at the dock at Ellis Island, and the uncle didn't get the mail. There was like a couple-week difference or whatever from when he showed up and when she was there, and there she was on the dock of Ellis Island, by herself, not speaking any English, no money in her pocket, and crying. And a Jewish family in New York took her in, and they spoke Yiddish together. That was the universal Jewish language. And 6 months later, they found the uncle. I mean, yeah, just imagine the courage that it takes to have gone through that. And to her dying day, when she would get to a doorway, she would stoop down, because the Jewish homes in the shtetls, if they made the doors short so the Cossacks couldn't come in with their horses and swords. So if you would ever go back, and I don't know if any of them still exist anymore, but they did for a while, and you could see these homes with short doors. And so no matter what, she'd kneel at the door. And so my background is I think a very rich one. And the other thing that I come from is kind of an entrepreneurial family. And I was just talking to somebody outside there who knew my family business. And my father, his two brothers, and his father started the first discount store in the United States called the Miracle Mart in 1950. And before then, there were Five and Dimes, and there were department stores. But there wasn't a store where you would buy things out of boxes and help yourself. It wasn't about the show of the store. And you had things that were high volume and low markup. And you also had items that were seconds and remainders. And they started this business in Ravenna, Ohio, a small town near Akron. And they did quite well with it. And after 2 years, this guy named Sam Walton shows up. And spent almost 2 weeks with my father going around the Miracle Marts around Akron. He swore he was never going to open a store in Ohio. He was only going to open it in Arkansas. And lo and behold, in the mid-'70s, Walmart put my father's and my family business out of business. They, the key to their success was that they had a one store for a small town. They'd try and get to a town of 30,000, and then they would have the one store, and they would be able to capture that market. Well, Walmart came in and undersold them, and virtually put them out of business. But my parents retired, and they were able to do fine. It wasn't, it was hard. 300 people lost their jobs. I have a brother, Stuart, who wrote a book called Guide to a Serial Entrepreneur, Why I Can't Stop Starting Over. And he got involved in the video business, and he ended up creating a system that was eventually adopted by Blockbusters to categorize movies. And if you noticed, if you were a video person, there was a time where you would just go into the video store and there would just be a wall of drama. And then it started to get organized. Steve McQueen movies and Humphrey Bogart and Hitchcock, and you would start to see the teen comedies. And it was my brother Stuart who put that together in his video stores in New England. And then put together a computer system within the store that if you liked a certain movie, it would tell you other movies that you might like. And then he decided to create what he called Real.com. which was the precursor to Netflix. And it was actually bought by Hollywood Video. Never really worked. In fact, it always lost money. But he started the first kind of Netflix operation, and he had what he called the Cinemasaurus, like a thesaurus, where you could punch in a movie and it would give you other ones and small reviews or whatever. He wasn't successful with that. The last thing he did, which is another thing that I'm very proud of, is that he created a natural pharmacy called Elephant in Berkeley, California, where it was half conventional. You could still get aspirin and get all your prescription drugs, but the other half was homeopathic and herbal and natural, and he would have experts there, and he would have yoga classes, and it eventually got bought out by CVS Pharmacy. But one of the things that he really pushed was, why are you selling cigarettes? People are coming in for health. And I don't know if you've watched the news in the last couple of weeks, but finally CVS Pharmacy got it. And by the way, there was an interesting story when I was on council. We had these middle school kids that came to us and said, did you know that in the pharmacies in Colorado Springs that they sell the cigarettes by the candy? And that they're actually given them more of a discount if they place the cigarettes by the candy down lower. And the reason why was that they wanted the kids to shoplift cigarettes so they get hooked. And we actually passed a law in city council because of these middle school kids to disallow that. Now you never see cigarettes. They're always behind the counter, and there's a reason for it. But my political ride started when I was in first grade. I dislocated my hip with a hula hoop the first day of first grade, and I was so excited to go I didn't tell anybody about it, and then they took me away in an ambulance. So I was the hero of first grade, and that was the beginning. But when I was on council, and the issues I'm still involved with actually are fire, flood, and water. Drought, is at the background of all that, and so that's something maybe we can talk about a little later if you're interested. But having said that, my first week on council were the floods of 1999. And that was when we had 8 inches of rain in 48 hours. Actually, a lot of it outside the town. Jimmy Camp Creek was one of the major culprits. And a huge amount of the wastewater system wasn't fortified and it broke. But before then, we had a system, especially on the west side and in Cheyenne Canyon, where people that the groundwater was high, people that were having their basements flooded were taking sump pumps and pumping it back into the system because if they put it in the yard, it would just come back in. So they were putting it into the sewer system, and people that lived at the end of the sewer lines had sewage gushing out of their toilets 15 feet high, out of shower heads. They couldn't stop it, gallons and gallons a minute. And about 200 homes were ruined. And I remember in the middle of the night calling Phil Tollison and saying, Phil, we got to do something. He goes, well, we don't have enough pump trucks to capture all this. All we can do is put it in Fountain Creek. Well, about 6 months later, I went down to Rocky Ford and La Junta and Lamar and all these places. It's really the breadbasket, the places where we get our food from in this area, and there was sewage everywhere. We had dumped hundreds of millions of gallons of sewage, plus all these pipes had broken, and the people down there were furious. This wasn't of their creation. And if you think about Colorado Springs, you couldn't script a worse place to build a city. Not because of our beautiful climate or access to mountains, but when you think about it, we don't have a river to absorb our stormwater. We're the only city in Colorado that doesn't. Grand Junction does, Denver, Pueblo, Fort Collins, you can go through the whole list. We have this creek that starts at 14,000 feet and ends at 4,000. That's marine shale soil that has Pikes Peak granite, the most highly erodible granite known eroding into it. And then we've built all these impervious surfaces. We built this city for cars. People would always say, why don't you have better public transportation? When I was on council, I would always say, we don't have the population density, we don't have the place for pedestrians to be. If you wanted to take a bus out here, it's not easy, is it? And I worry about, I'm a boomer, I'm 61, I probably shouldn't be driving in 10 years. Some people in this room probably feel the same way, and I don't know what we're going to do, because it's not a place where you could drive, where you could ride public transportation. But having said that, I got impassioned about it. And then I had another career where I worked for a group called the Trust for Public Land. And they were a group that helped save the Stratton land and Red Rock Canyon with Terry and I. But my job with them was to create TOPS kinds of initiatives for other communities around the state. So for almost 3 years, I went around and helped with what they called land protection ballot measures. And I helped in many other communities do similar kinds of initiatives like TOPS. And one of my places to work was a 5-county area in the southern part of the state to create what they call the Lower Arkansas Valley Water Conservancy District, put together to keep water in the valley, because when the water gets taken out by what they call the water buffaloes, the people from Aurora and Littleton and other places that don't have enough water, the area down there becomes deserts. So if you ever go to Crowley County, that used to be rich farmland, and now they have a prison. That's their industry. So their notion was to tax themselves and to keep the water in the valley, but to keep the ecosystems in place, the place for the wildlife. And the farms and ranches were able to get money for that, for their water rights. And they couldn't sell it to developers. Nobody wanted to live down there, but they finally had somebody to sell it to that wasn't the water buffaloes. And they could take that money and invest in organic farming and drip irrigation and do things to really make their lands healthier. And so if you notice today, if you go to these farmers markets, a lot of the places that you get that produce from is from down there. Much of it's organic. And it's created this whole new industry. But having said that, I got involved in the water wars. And the hard part about us is, another reason we shouldn't exist is that we have to import 80% of our water, 200 miles or more. It's great water, primary source water. If you filter out the chlorine, it's as good as any water in the country. We're the first ones to drink it. Think about going to a place like Alabama or Ohio or places I grew up. It's gone through. By the time the Arkansas River goes to the Gulf of Mexico, goes through 140 water treatment plants. So think about the privilege that we have with this great water, but we should never have it. Pikes Peak watershed can only support about 20% of our population. But we were aggressive with water rights. My predecessors on council have this great water. It's really ours. We can do it, but we had no way to deliver it. There were 2 dam projects that were going to dam up areas that people wanted to use for recreation. One was by Buena Vista. I don't know if you see those signs that say, "Don't dam the Arkansas." That's us. And another one was a little further north, and both those projects didn't have the political will to go forward. So the only way we can get new water to our community is through the Pueblo Reservoir. And that's piping it down the Arkansas River into the Pueblo Reservoir, which has the capacity to hold it. But lo and behold, we have to get the permission from Pueblo County through a 1041 process to bring it up here. So they said, fix Fountain Creek. Fix your stormwater problems, fix your flooding, your wastewater spills, and then we'll let you do it. So when I was on council, we put together what we called the Storm Drainage Enterprise, and people didn't like it because we just imposed it. It wasn't a vote of the people. But we did that because we wanted to get this SDS water up here. And by the way, it's 78 million new gallons of fresh water a day. If you think about Colorado Springs, we use 125 million a day. So it's almost doubling it. The biggest water project of its kind in the country. I mean, look what's happening in California. People would kill for that water. And we have it. It's not that expensive, and we have the ability to bring it up here, and all we have to do is fix our close to $1 billion flood and stormwater problem. And you add that into the mix with the risk of fire, because we've been suppressing fires since 1910. In my research, I found out that there was actually a fire in 1908 that burned from Cheyenne Mountain up to Wilkerson Pass all summer. A slow burning fire burned the underbrush, and if you look at pictures in the past and you think about us as a community, our forests normally have 80, 100, 125 trees per acre. Now it's 500 to 2,000. You add the fact that we've suppressed fires all those years, and we built so much in that wildland-urban interface that what happened with Waldo Canyon and Black Forest is the tip of the iceberg. It's that whole mountain backdrop. It's some of the open space that we've saved, Terry. We have to worry about, because it's the issue that climate change is impacting the West more than any other one. If you think about the East Coast, it's about storm surges and dikes and making communities flood-proof and getting them away from the low-lying coastlines. Out here, it's fire. And then the fires burn so hot that it creates about 2 feet of cement in the soil. And nothing can grow out of it. I mean, the roots are burned down. That's if you could stop the fire, by the way. And these fires are really hard to stop because they become floating clouds of fire. That fire breaks don't work. It's such a hot system on its own. And so then when you have a rain event, like we had in the last summer, or the summer before, you have to multiply that event between 5 and 15 times. So if you have a 10-year flood, it could be a 150-year flood. And all that sediment comes rushing down. The water is part of the problem, but a lot of it's all that sediment and loose soil that no longer has anything holding it in. So you think about Colorado Springs, and it's 28,000 acres of wildland-urban interface in the city limits. We're about 125,000 acres total. Out of that 28,000 acres at high risk, 10,000 of it's open space and parks. So there's no development on it. And the remaining 18,000 acres, over 50,000 addresses. Multiply that by 2.3 or whatever it is, per household. You're talking about 100,000 people that live in a wildland-urban interface. And that's just the city. The county, Black Forest, Monument, Palmer Lake, Ruxton Canyon. You think about all these areas, South Cheyenne Canyon, North Cheyenne Canyon, Bear Creek. They're just waiting to burn. You combine that with the fact that we live in a place where arsonists like to do crazy things, but we have the second highest number of lightning strikes of any place in the country. 80% of the fires are caused by lightnings. And so, you talk about a perfect storm and what we need to think about as a community. Flooding was always going to be a problem because of all the impervious surfaces and what we didn't build in terms of infrastructure because we built the city too cheap. But now we got the fires and the floods. And in my mind, there's no more important issue. And so what I'm involved with, I'm actually the chair of this subcommittee for the Regional Stormwater Task Force called the Emergency Subcommittee. I'm also on the Fountain Creek Watershed District Board, and those are the only 2 political things I do anymore. The rest of the time I try to kind of stay clear of it because it's a funny group. Terry and I were just talking about it, but when we were there, we didn't realize it was the golden era where people kind of got along and respected each other. We never criticized the city employees in public. We would disagree with each other, and publicly, we would have debates, but then we would be friends afterwards. There was never a division between mayor and the council. There was tensions, but nothing like there is today. And today it doesn't feel functional to me. There's just a lot of acrimony, a lot of people that seem to want to do the opposite of what somebody else is doing just because they're doing it. There's 3 members of council. As soon as the mayor says something, they want to do the opposite. And I don't think it's good government. So I'm not anxious to be a part of it right now. But feel lucky in lots of ways. There were several things, and I'll kind of end it with this, so I don't talk at you too long. But I was so happy to be at the right place at the right time during those floods in people's homes. in 1999. Because what we were able to do is we raised everybody's utility rates, not a lot, but a little bit, and we came up with $2.1 million to make all those lives whole. About 200 families, West Sider, Cheyenne Canyon, didn't have a lot of money. They didn't have insurance. Their houses were ruined. It wasn't the utilities' responsibility. It was an act of God. It really was. In fact, they were supposed to have their own insurance, and people didn't think about it. And we made their lives whole, and I had a big part in that with other people on council. But I was really glad to have been there for that. I was really glad to have been on council when Katrina happened. And this is something that I look back on, and I just think about being at the right place at the right time. But it was before we built Rico's Café and Wine Bar, and we had just emptied it out. It used to be part of the bookstore, and it was this big empty storefront. And then all of a sudden, Katrina happens. On a Monday, on the Saturday afterwards, I decided we have this empty space. Let's put together a housing bank. Let's see if we can raise places for people to stay who may be coming through our community. And lo and behold, I had all these volunteers. By the way, many from New Life Church. Ted Haggard told them all, people to go down there, people who politically we were on different sides, and we were all together like I had never seen before in this community. And lo and behold, the evacuees started showing up. They didn't have a place to go, and they would show up with nothing. No the clothes that they had been wearing for days. They didn't have prescription drugs. They, in some cases, didn't have their false teeth. They didn't have anything to hold them in with. They had lost their glasses. They had no money. They were showing up at Poor Richard's. And what can we do? And so the fire department, I happened to be vice mayor at the time. I had the rest of council very much supporting this. And we really took care of people. And in fact, we set up this recovery center where all their needs were taken care of. But we had a dentist there, we had people from FEMA, we had somebody giving away eyeglasses and eye doctors, and we got them all apartments, we got furniture, we had volunteers, and we even had people in buses. At one point, we had 23 people on the ground at the Houston Astrodome with T-shirts that said Rocky Mountain, the relocation. They were all African American, so they had to wear a white T-shirt to look different from everybody else. We were bringing buses down with food and water and baby formula and bug spray and all these supplies that we were working with a rogue county commissioner in Amarillo who had a big loading dock and trucks that knew where to go. And by the way, the National Guard wouldn't let them on public roads. They had to go sneak behind. These were citizens really taking charge. And 200-300 people would swarm these buses in rural areas because they were desperate. Nobody was getting them supplies. And so we were bringing all that food down. We brought down over 50,000 pounds of food and water from Colorado Springs. Everybody was volunteering. And we brought 2,000 people up here. And we took care of all their needs. They were never in a shelter. They were never sleeping on a cot. And then the amazing thing was that because I was doing it, I wasn't a nonprofit. People just gave me money. I raised over $150,000 in cash. I remember I had these big bags I would put in my safe at the restaurant, full of $20s and $100 bills, and so these people would come and they would be desperate, and there's probably a few scammers, but most of them just desperately needed somebody to help them. And so we had about 10 million airline miles donated to us. So we were connecting families, and if you think about the families in New Orleans, most of them have never traveled. In fact, a lot of them were scared to get on airplanes, and all they had were their families, but they were scattered everywhere. And so we would call up, and somebody would call us, and they would be in a hotel in Andalusia, Alabama, and they didn't have enough money for food for their kids for the next 48 hours till they could get a plane out, and we would wire them money and get them food and get them a cab ride to the airport and make sure somebody met them at the airport who could help them get on the plane. And so, all these stories, and I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. It was just a wonderful experience to be a part of, to watch this community come together like that and help people. And there's about 3 other times where I was glad to be at the right place at the right time. One of them was with you, Terry, with the TOPS extension. because what we did is we tested Doug Bruce with the Tofts extension, and we won in the Colorado Supreme Court. And Terry knows that it held up all this money for, I think, well over a year, maybe even longer. But we got ballot language in there that said, without raising additional taxes, shall the 10th of a cent be extended from the year 2012 to 2025 for these purposes, which was really the truth. We weren't going to raise any more tax. We were keeping the same tax in place. Well, he took us to the Supreme Court. We won. So now anybody that has an extension in the state doesn't have to put the mandatory Tabor language in it, which makes it really difficult to pass. And I think about all the ballot measures, all the school boards, all the different communities that have benefited from it. I'm not against Tabor, by the way. I think people should have a right to vote on their taxes, and you shouldn't trust the elected officials. They should be able to justify it. I don't like the caps or the way that it's supposed to sabotage taxes. I think it should be an even playing field. And so those are issues that we can debate all day, but I'm really glad to be there. I was really glad to be there when a young woman came to me, and I was on the Gill Foundation board. And by the way, Tim Gill gave us every year $25,000 as a board member to give away to a nonprofit group that fit the mission of the Gill Foundation in no more than $5,000 increments. A young woman came to me. She was at a dog wash place. Somebody asked her to hand him a bottle of shampoo. She did, and that dog bit her in the face. She was 20 years old. She was in beauty school. She didn't have any money. She had this scar on her face and a nervous twitch, and her life was just, completely turned upside down. I was able to donate money to Memorial Hospital from the Gill Foundation to get her face fixed. And then Michael Merrifield, who was a friend of mine, actually proposed a law that said the first bite isn't free. There was a law in place that said if your dog had not bitten somebody else before, that you weren't legally responsible. So we actually changed that law. Michael, it failed, but then the Republicans came back and did the same thing, and it was the right thing to do. But just being at the right place at the right time, it felt good. And then the last thing that, you think about all the things you do on city council, and by the way, I got very involved in funding the widening of I-25. I was chair of the board of the Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments, and we weren't getting our fair share of the federal gas tax money, and you probably have heard that before, and it still can happen. But we were able to get funding because I went up there with some other people, and we really worked it hard, and we got the Governor Owens at the time, and Tom Norton, the transportation director, to give us the money that we needed to widen I-25 from South Academy to North Academy. Before then, average speed during rush hour was 14 miles an hour. We were the most congested city of 500,000 or less in the country. I mean, think about that lifestyle. So I felt proud of that. But if I hadn't been there, it probably still would have happened. But there was something on council that I was proud of that wouldn't have happened without me, and that was that we got our own DNA lab in Colorado Springs. And before then, it was 3 months to 6 months to get DNA back from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. And so, we have a high sexual assault rate here. We're 11th in the country. Now, it may be because people report more here. It's not necessarily that, but we all know that that's a problem. And so it would drive me crazy to think that these perpetrators, these terrible people, were out in the street for months because we couldn't get the DNA back. And so I worked hard when I was on council with the police chief and with several people in the police department, and we got our own DNA lab. And now we get the results back in 24 hours or less. It could be even 12 hours, and we're able to really, really help people. I think in a way that makes a difference. And it's just being at the right place at the right time. It really is. Sometimes you happen to be there, and you can open the door. And I feel fortunate for that. I've had a couple things in my life that was really being at the wrong place at the wrong time. I picked up 2 hitchhikers in the mid-'70s when everybody hitchhiked, and they put a gun to my head and tied me up and cocked the trigger and almost killed me. They didn't, but you know, it was like, phew, I made it out of that one. I rounded the corner about 5 years ago on the trail I always hike, and there's a bear like that, and I go falling over into the bushes, and the bear sniffs my face, and and just one swipe, and then when I was growing up, a tree fell on our house, and luckily, the beam caught it, but it was right over, right over me. And so, you think about things in life, and you have your blessings that you count. But mine's been a great one in Colorado Springs, and I feel lucky that I have good businesses. I've been involved in public life, that I've been able to do things like review movies and have all these experiences, and so for me it's been a great ride. I'm very honored to be here today. I couldn't believe the title of this, icon. I tell Patricia, do I still have to take out the garbage? And she says yes.